Wires. Yep.
Thank you, Jesus.
Test.
Hello?
Test? Yep, there we go. Okay, cool. All right.
Thank you, Jesus.
Glory, hallelujah. Amen. Praise the Lord.
Okay.
Praise the Lord.
Hallelujah.
Yeah.
How y'all doing today?
Jesus, bless,
Good.
bless.
Hallelujah. Good.
Good to see a lot of people here today.
Amen.
I would say it's good to see smiling faces, but nobody can smile, right? Because we don't know what we're looking at.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll be done with this soon, right?
Yeah.
It's good to see faces. We'll go with that.
Okay. Hallelujah. Praise the Lord.
It's on?
Hallelujah.
Okay.
Amen.
Hello everyone out there that's catching the broadcast. If anyone is, I apologize. Didn't know the thing was running already, so I guess we're live. All right, so I just want everybody to just take a second, look at your neighbor,
Yeah.
and say, neighbor.
Neighbor.
When David was writing his psalm, he said, I was glad when they said unto me, let us go into the house of the Lord.
Let us go into the house of the Lord.
So tell your neighbor you're happy to be here, and just pretend to smile if you're not,
Happy to be here. Let's go.
and say that I'm happy to see you here as well.
Happy to see you here as well.
Yes,
Amen.
All right, brother.
hallelujah.
So, you know that we've been dealing with Paul here, right? The last couple weeks. And so I'm going to do a very quick rundown of a couple of things, and then we'll go ahead and get to the rest of my lesson. So if you remember here last week, let's take a look at that really quick. Midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and sang praises to God.
Yeah.
And the prisoners heard them. So we're talking about this, right? Where did I say that they were at? This was not Club Med, was it?
No.
Right? It said when they were arrested for doing nothing more than talking about Jesus.
Yeah.
Right? And it said they put them in the worst of the worst. It was they called it the inner prison.
Yeah.
Right? So they had, you know, the ugly stone walls and everything, right? Scary looking. And then there was the inside, and then there was another inside. They put them on the inside of the inside. The worst of the worst. Well, most of us would probably be pretty bummed about that, right? I mean, wouldn't we most likely be going, oh, my life sucks.
Yeah.
What did I do to deserve to be in here? God hates me.
My Jesus.
And they did nothing of the sort. It says they were singing,
That's right.
right?
Yeah.
So as I mentioned, we don't know if they were any good. You know, that might have been the most terrible singing on the planet. You know, the other prisoners might have been begging them just to stop because you're adding to the other tortures that I've already gotten, right? Or the guy might have been Luciano Pavarotti, and they're like, hey, this is great. We get a free concert while we're in prison. We don't know. But that wasn't the point at all. It didn't say whether they were bad or good. It could have been absolutely terrible. They were singing in their predicament, which was not a good one at all. I'm sure that it was cold,
Yeah.
very dimly lit, because they probably only had torches. Said they were in the inner prison. That's usually like down in the basement of the basement. Like I said, it was the hole underneath the hole. They threw you in the hole? No. They threw them in the hole under the hole. All right, so it was probably wet, you know, very damp, clammy. It was not a fantastic place to be. And then it said that they had their feet stuck. It said they put them in stocks, right? They were in chains. So not only did they put them in this nasty hole, which was probably already bad enough, and probably rats and stuff scurrying around down there, but they locked them up too.
Yes, sir.
And out of all of that, what are they doing? They're crazy enough to be singing to God. And then comes this big earthquake. And it says at midnight too, right? Most of us would have been like, you know what, I'm just going to try to get some sleep and wait this out. You know, how much worse could it be? They're still awake. At midnight, it says. They were singing. And this big old earthquake comes, but it doesn't destroy the building. It doesn't make massive rocks come down and kill everybody. It busts the doors open and pops off all of their chains. So what kind of an earthquake is that? Right? I mean, I'm thinking everybody in here has probably seen earthquake video, right? California, Japan, you know, they are seismically active areas, you know, so we get video of like from the inside of a store in Japan, right? And everything's real quiet. All of a sudden all the shelving's going like this and bottles are falling off, smashing and stuff. It's never good. It's destruction. But yet this earthquake did nothing bad except set them free. Right? So this just wasn't a seismic earthquake, was it? It was angels going to deal with this problem that God said, you go down. My men are in there. You go get them out.
That's right.
So not only did it let them loose, but what did he say about the rest of them? It turned everybody loose, didn't it? The whole place busted open. Even the people that didn't have any right to be leaving, all of a sudden now, you know, they were bad people. They were thieves and murderers and stuff. And they probably belonged there. And they popped all them loose too. And the jailer says, oh, I'm done. Excuse me. The head of the jail says, I'm done. I already know what my overlords are going to do to me. It's going to be long, and it's going to be very painful, and they'll probably stretch it out for days before they kill me. So it says he was going to fall on his sword, just to make it quick. So the pain would be relatively over, and then after that, nothing. Right? He would just die. And Paul yells out, no. Stop. Do yourself no harm. We're all still here. Well, why would he have had to ask that if this place had any windows at all?
That's right.
Right? When the earthquake hit, all the torches went out. So it's pitch dark down here, right? They're in this hole. Like I said, it's probably damp and nasty, and you hear rats scurrying in the darkness. And there's no light. And he yells, no, wait. We're all still here. Don't do what you're about to do. Not even being able to see him, but warned by God, knowing it. That he's about to, right? And what does it say happened after that? He spoke to them about what had just happened, explained that it was not an accidental earthquake. And it says that his house was baptized. They were converted because of that incident.
Yes, sir.
Weird, huh?
Yes, sir.
So sometimes we think that we're in the crap, we're in the spot that couldn't be worse. And our testimony can get to somebody else, and they can see, how did we take that? Did we curse God? Did we curse everybody around and say, you know, this stinks? You're raining turds on me from heaven. What did I do to deserve this? God hates me. Or you can have a testimony like they did, and this guy's entire family was changed by what they saw because of the way they reacted to that. They were singing. They were giving thanks, not cursing. How crazy is that? We'd all be like, these guys are out of their minds. They must have beaten them too hard. Did they get kicked in the head a few times? There's something ain't right about that boy. So then it was finally daylight, and they turned around and they said, okay, now we're going to send to the magistrate and let them go. And they find out that they're actually Roman citizens, which they never determined before they did what they did, and they beat them. Well, beating a Roman citizen was against the law. That was a violation that the people doing it would have then been tortured. So it says the magistrates were in fear. And yet, they turned around and said, okay, you know what? It would be within my right to really want revenge on these people, but they didn't. It says they went out of the prison and entered into the house of Lydia, who was a friend who would look after them. And it says they comforted them and departed. So I would assume they gave them some medical attention because they were probably pretty rough looking. You know, they were beat up before they were put in there. So So I'm betting they had, cuts and black and blue marks and anything else that was going on. So, whatever they could pass for medical attention, they tried to help him out, and then they left. Instead of doing what they could have done. And so in Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, I'm just going to go through that really quick. Like I said, I'm going to end the recap and we'll pick up from where we were right last week. So, Paul said, "That which I speak it not after the Lord, but as it were foolishly, in this confidence of boasting. Seeing that many glory after the flesh, I will glory also. For ye suffer fools gladly, seeing ye yourselves are wise." You think he's mocking them? Does he really think that these guys are wise? He's playing with them, isn't he? He's like, y'all think you're all that, right? Bag of chips and a nice sandwich? No, you're not that smart. You think you are. "For ye suffer if a man bring you into bondage, if a man devour you, if a man take of you, if a man exalt himself, if a man smite you on the face. I speak as concerning a reproach, as though we had been weak. Howbeit, whereinsoever any is bold, I speak foolishly. I'm bold also. Are they Hebrews? Are they Jewish? Yes, so am I. Are they an Israelite? So am I. Are they the seed of Abraham? So am I. Are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool. I am more, in labors more abundant, in stripes above measure, in prisons more frequent, in deaths often." He was just in prison, wasn't he? So he's not lying here, right? He's not exaggerating. He's saying, this is what happened to me. This is his true testimony. "Of the Jews 5 times received I 40 stripes, save one. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I suffered a shipwreck. A night and a day I've been in the deep. In journeyings often, in perils," I don't know why, but every time when I get in here, my nose. "In journeyings often, in perils of waters, in perils of robbers, in perils by my own countrymen, in perils by the heathen, in perils in the cities, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren." Did he miss anything? The only thing that I could see that he never said he was in peril with was a peril on an airplane. He got everything else. They didn't have any planes back then, right? But he said he was in peril on land. Oh, thanks. He was in peril on the ocean. His friends were betraying him, peril in his countrymen, peril of the heathens, so the people that didn't like him anyway, even my friends hate me, and so does everybody else. And it goes on. "In weariness and painfulness, in watching often, in hunger and thirst, in fasting often, in cold and nakedness, besides those things that are without, that which cometh upon me daily, the care of all the churches." Is he a little insane? He starts at 16 and talks about all these things, and then he gets to 28 and he says, okay, I don't care about any of these now. Let me really tell you what bugs me the most. Most of us would be, isn't that enough? For real? What really hurts me the most is worrying about my churches. That's what he says. After all that nonsense, you would have figured that he would have said, oh, woe's me. Everybody hates me. Yeah, you hear people whine that everybody hates you, but in this particular case, it looks like he's got some evidence that that's actually pretty close to a common and correct assumption. He went to the house of Lydia and they treated him well, but pretty much for the most part, everybody does want to kill him, or at least beat him up. And yet he's not saying anything about any of those things. He's not whining about his own condition, which a lot of us do. He's saying, I put all of that aside because what I really worry about is the people that I'm trying to shepherd. Didn't it say that the shepherd left 99 sheep to go find the one that ran off?
Yes, sir.
And if he leaves the 99 behind and he goes to look for one, what's he going to run into? What could be out there in the dark?
Anything.
Wolves, lions, tigers and elephants, oh my. There could be anything dangerous hiding out there in the dark, can't there? But he's not saying I might go out there and die. He's saying I have to go get that one stupid sheep that ran off because he's an idiot, did it again. And now I got to go risk life and limb to go get him and bring him back again. And yet he goes ahead and does it. And Jesus said that we were the one. Right? He had to go out and find us. So out of all of that, what's he worrying about? His people. Who is weak and I'm not weak? Who's offended and I burn not? If I must needs glory, I will glory the things which concern my infirmities. Not that I was educated at the best school on the planet. Right? Because it said that he went to basically what we would say was the Harvard, right? He had like a double PhD in theology here. He's not talking about any of that. And again, he's not glorying about all the other stuff that happened to him, that he could turn around and say, well, look how much I've suffered for the gospel's sake. He did. More than any of the other apostles. And he doesn't say anything about any of that. He's not giving himself any ego, not any glory. He's saying that I only look at my failings and rue those, that I try to be better, which concern my infirmities. The God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, which is blessed forevermore, knows I lie not. Sorry, excuse me for a second. Apologies. Okay, thank you for everybody's patience. Okay, so we're going to go to 27th chapter of Acts. So you're like, okay, well maybe he's exaggerating some of these stories, right? I mean, how many times could somebody really get himself into trouble? Well, apparently it does follow him around. When it was determined that we should sail into Italy, they delivered Paul and certain other prisoners unto one named Julius, a centurion of Augustus' band. Wait, Paul's in prison again? If he didn't have bad luck, he'd have no luck at all, would he? Here he is again. Busted. Disgusted, can't be trusted. Now he's locked up again, and they're giving him into a charge of what would be like the Roman police here. Right? This guy, Julius. And entering into a ship, oh boy, of Adramyttium, we launched, meaning to sail by the coast of Asia, one Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, being with us. And the next day we touched at Sidon, and Julius courteously entreated Paul and gave him liberty to go unto his friends to refresh himself. So apparently Julius wasn't that bad a guy. He was in charge. He was a Roman. Right? He was part of the military. So I guess you could kind of say that he was in the possession of the MPs, if you wanted to think about it that way, right? That's probably similar to how we would look at it. But he said, okay, you know what? I'm going to let you go see your friends for a little bit. That's pretty unusual, isn't it? How many of us would think that if we were in his position that we would get any kind of liberty call at all? We wouldn't, right? We'd probably be like he was before with, this thing locked to his foot or his hand, and like, oh, no way, man. You're not going anywhere. You're going to run as soon as I let you free. I know it. And that's going to get me in all kinds of trouble. He found favor with a heathen, a Roman. Now the story starts winding up. And when we launched from thence, we sailed unto Cyprus, because the winds were contrary. And when we had sailed over the sea of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra, a city of Lycia. And there the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing to Italy, and he put us therein. And when we had sailed slowly many days and scarce were come over against Cnidus, the wind not suffering us, we sailed unto Crete, over against Salmone, and hardly passing it, came unto a place which is called the Fair Havens, nigh whereunto was the city of Lasea. Now when time was spent, sailing was now dangerous, Because the fast was now already past, Paul admonished them. All right, let me take a sidestep here. Sorry. Before we get into this, who's in charge of the ship? Usually the captain, right?
Yeah.
And don't we usually consider that for the most of the part, anybody who is appointed captain usually has a lot of experience, right? He's usually put there because of his time in service and his wisdom and knowledge of the ocean and issues that can come while moving from place to place. Here we say they weren't so great at listening. So let me take a little side trip here. All right. Y'all heard the story of the Titanic, right?
Yeah.
Heard about that one? Right?
Yeah.
1912. Super big ship, brand new. Ship all busted up, right? They hit an iceberg. All right. Well, the Titanic was engineered by experts, right? But they had the ego of men. The Ark was built by what? Some amateur guy who had never built a ship. Right? So if we assume that the size of the Ark, given a cubit, probably about 18 inches, nobody knows exactly how long that measurement is. That's something that's been debated for centuries. How long is a cubit? Nobody ever actually wrote it down. If we assume that it's 1.5 feet, the Ark was about half the size of the Titanic. The Titanic had a job. It was supposed to go across the ocean, back and forth. What was the job of the Ark? It was just supposed to sit there, right? So if you have a lifeboat, usually what's the purpose of a lifeboat? A lifeboat's usually to get off of a ship that has a problem, right? Now, unfortunately, the Titanic only had half the lifeboats. But if you think about it, the Ark really was just one giant lifeboat because it had one job. It had no sails, it had no engines, it didn't have to go anywhere. It just had to last long enough and not sink to keep everybody who was on it from perishing from God's judgment. He said, I'm going to destroy the world by water. But Noah, you found favor. So you and your family and anybody else, now that's part we don't talk about very often. Anybody else who would have been smart enough to listen could have gotten on that ship. Okay, that thing was about 450 to 500 feet long. Okay, that's bigger than a World War II submarine destroyer. They were only about 375 feet long. I looked it up and they weighed about 2,000 tons. That was a big ship. Other people could have made it. 100 years, he warned them, God's judgment is going to arrive. Is that right? Wasn't it 100 years?
Yeah.
Didn't it say it took that long?
Yeah.
No, it wasn't 100 years? How long was it? It was 200 years? 100 years, he told them, judgment's coming. He says it's going to rain. Well, it had never rained. So they're like, oh, this guy's a crackpot.
Praise the Lord, everybody.
One thing that he said that caught my attention is sometimes God will leave you somewhere floating. That don't mean God has abandoned you. A lot of times we are in the river of life and we're floating and we don't know what direction we're going. They didn't have no way of going. They had to go wherever God pushed them to go. And a lot of times that's how we feel, even in this pandemic, that we're just sitting and floating and we don't know which way we're going. Sometimes it's not for you to know which way you're going. It's for you to have faith in the ability that God is able to direct you to wherever he wants you to be. They didn't have no rudder. They didn't have no sails. They were floating on the mercy and the grace of God. So a lot of times when we get stuck where we at, we're wondering, how am I going to be able to move? We have to have faith that God knows best. Think about it. Jesus was in the ship sleeping. And the winds and the waves were just tearing up the place.
Master, we perish.
They come downstairs and said, Master, shall we? And sometimes we feel like that. But when we go downstairs, we don't see Jesus. Ooh. When we get downstairs, we don't see nobody in the bed. When we get downstairs, God is not there. That's when you have to have faith to know that God is able. Give God a praise. to do. A lot of times we sit up here and we say, oh, God, where are thou? And God said, I'm there. When you see 1 footprints in the sand, that's why I'm carrying you. And while you're on the ship, I'm carrying you. Why? Because it's the winds of my mercy and grace. Some of us feel like we're in that water just floating, and God said, you're not there by yourself. I just need to see your reaction. I think the same outcome would have came if they would have went out there and said, I rebuke the winds and the waves. They had the power. Woo, right in the bow of the ship.
He said he granted it to them.
Right. So therefore, we got the power to do the same.
It was their unbelief.
What keeps us in the middle of the sea is our unbelief. That's all I got to say. God bless you.
All right, now that he totally co-opted all my notes.
You got some water down there, brother.
Oh, okay. Oh, cool. Thank you. All right. So anyway, back to our analogy here. Okay. So a World War II destroyer, right, is smaller than the Ark. It had 60,000 horsepower. Now, you all know how much a car has. That's a lot.
All right.
Okay. The biggest battleships that we ever built were the Iowa class, and the New Jersey happens to be one of them. The New Jersey is actually over in New Jersey right now, so it's really not that far away if you ever wanted to go see it. It's quite impressive. It's over 800 feet long, and it had 212,000 shaft horsepower. And the way it was built, its nose was pointy, like most ships are. And it was 14-inch thick armor to repel gunfire. Imagine like the thickness of your entire arm if you were sitting like this. This is all steel. Because the shells that were going to hit it were huge. The Japanese battleships had 18-inch guns. That was built for a purpose, right? It was built to fight. So it was built that way. The destroyer needed 60,000 horsepower because it needed to be fast. They had to move around quickly because while they're hunting submarines are hunting them too.
That's right.
They ain't, being shy of firing torpedoes back. You had to be able to duck and weave. You had to do a float like a butterfly, sting like a bee.
I'm on.
Right? So it was them going, mano a mano. They were fighting. That was their purpose. The Ark only had one job. It was just that everybody was going to get in it.
That's right.
Right? So you see a lot of paintings, showing like all the giraffes and stuff loading up, right? And the Ark looks, and it's got this really nice, beautiful point on the nose. And sometimes both ends are illustrated like that. I don't think that's correct at all. I think it was a giant rectangle. Why? Battleship had 212,000 shaft horsepower. How much power did the Ark have? 0. It had no sails, like Pastor said, it had no engines. It wasn't designed to go anywhere. Warships are designed to cross an ocean and fight while they're doing it. All the Ark had to do was keep everybody from drowning. So it was probably just one giant box. Why would God make it so difficult? Noah's not a maritime engineer to begin with. Why would he make it so difficult that, you got to build this fancy curved compound wood, and I don't know what I'm doing. I'm a farmer. Building a box is simple. Squares are just easy. They're big. You just make a straight corner and you're done. So I don't think it had any particular shape. It was just a box. That was its purpose. Think about it for a minute. Some of us have 212,000 shaft horsepower. Some of us are just boxes. We all have a purpose. Yours may not be mine. I might be the battleship, or I might be the Ark. You have to be okay with whatever you're put in. Like Pastor was saying, sometimes you go down below deck and you look and you say, Master, we perished. Master's nowhere to be found. Aren't you concerned that we're going to die? He was asleep. He wasn't even sitting, if it had portholes, he wasn't even sitting looking out a porthole window going, yeah, it's getting pretty rough out there. He's asleep in the middle of a storm. And the rest of them were thinking, oh yeah, that's it, we're done. We're all going to die. And sometimes we think that God's asleep in our storm. Because we're like, well, where is he? He's not doing anything. I prayed and got no answer.
Yeah.
I read my Bible and got no revelation. I talked to people who are godly men. Watch who you ask for advice. And they didn't have any good answers either. Or they said, go back and pray about it. I was like, I already did that. Okay, well, do it again. And you're looking and the bed's still empty. Where is he? Master's supposed to wake up and fix my problem. Eventually he will. Yeah. Mm-hmm. He doesn't worry about our time. He doesn't worry about any time. He invented time. Now I'm pretty mad because I lost an hour of sleep last night. I was annoyed by that. I woke up. It was 9:15. I'm like, I'm not used to this. Because yesterday it was 7:45.
Yeah.
I hate that. It takes me a week to get used to it. I'll be getting up to go to work tomorrow, and I'll be sitting down at my workstation and logging in, and I'll be like, Doug, you want coffee? I am so tired. It takes me a while to get used to that. That flip kills me. But that's something that we invented, right? Daylight savings time. Does God care? Does he get tired? Is he angry because he had to flip his clock too? He's outside of time, right? He invented time. So we're miffed that he's not coming when we think he should be. Like, when are you going to deal with this problem? Don't you see I have a problem? Do you care if I have a problem?
That's right.
He cares about all our problems.
That's right.
Because otherwise, the scripture lies.
My Lord.
So the scripture lies in one point, then it can't be trusted at all, can it?
No.
It's either all accurate
Yes, sir.
or it's all lies.
Yes, Lord.
It can't be halfway. There isn't any gray point here, right? It's black or white.
That's right.
It's either true or false, on or off. It's digital, not analog. So yeah, he cares about all those problems. He may not deal with them immediately, but that doesn't mean he's not going to deal with them. So let's look at the problem. Right, so it says we went nigh to the city of Lycia. Now, when much time was spent, sailing was now dangerous because the fast was now already past. Paul admonished them. Now, I went through that whole side thing to talk about this. Like I said, who was in charge? The captain, right?
Right.
And who's supposed to know best?
The captain.
The captain.
Right.
And his first officer, his XO. Right? And here comes what we now call the landlubber. The guy who knows nothing about ships, or at least they assumed,
Yeah.
to tell them all of a sudden, no, I got better advice. Really? Sirs, I perceive this voyage will be hurt and much damage, not only of the lading and ship, but also of our lives.
That's right.
The lading means cargo. Nevertheless, the centurion believed the master and the owner of the ship more than those things which were spoken by Paul. So the ship is in control of the Roman army, isn't it? Because it says the master and then it says the owner. Well, wouldn't that be the same guy? Well, in this particular case, it's Julius, the centurion. But he doesn't choose to listen at this point to this guy who he thinks knows nothing about ships and goes, oh, well, he's just afraid. He doesn't want to do this. Spoken by Paul.
Yes.
And because the haven was not commodious to winter in, so in other words, the port was too small. They didn't have enough room for all the ships.
I know.
Like, well, no, we need a new plan. It was not commodious to winter in, so they would have been stuck for, what, 3 or 4 months here, right? The more part advised to depart, thence also we need to roll. If by any means they might attain to Phoenix and there to winter, which is a haven of Crete and lieth toward the southwest and northwest. So they're saying, hey, we need to pack up and boogie so we can get to this larger port, which is going to be safer to hang out for the winter months, so that we can get and wait till the weather becomes favorable and then we can leave. What did the Titanic hit? An iceberg. The weather wasn't too favorable, was it? If they were out there in July, nothing would have happened. They would have made it to New York Harbor and they would have said, wow, this is the greatest ship ever built. Amazing. What a cruise we had. It was outstanding. Instead, 2/3 of the passengers die.
That's right.
The weather was not conducive for them to leave.
That's right.
And when the south wind blew softly, supposing they had obtained their purpose, loosing fence, they sailed close by Crete. So they're like, oh, well, see, I told you it's nothing to worry about. Weather's good. Look, the wind's even going in the direction I want, right? Titanic had engines. They had steam engines, right? This thing has nothing but sails. So they're at the mercy of whichever way the wind's going. Well, they're looking and going, oh, awesome. The wind is going exactly in the direction that I want. So your God must be wrong because here's the blessing. We're moving forward. Everything's good. Don't leave port prematurely.
My Lord.
Not long after, there arose against it a tempestuous wind called the Euroclydon, and the ship was caught and could not bear up into the wind. We let her drive. They're trying to steer, aren't they? It says the ship would not bear up. So the captain and the XO are going, no, we need to go that way. Wind's going that way. Like, well, you know, if they didn't have sails and they had engines, yeah, they could have gone the other way. It might have been slower and it might have been a really bumpy ride. Anybody ever been out in the bay when the wind gets up and you start getting some chop? I have.
A little bit. Yeah.
Anybody that's got a weak stomach? Oh yeah, you're going to be feeding fish. You're going to be chumming. Thankfully that doesn't happen to me, but a lot of people do. So yeah, it can be a really tough ride. But they thought everything was great, and then the wind turned against them. And they're trying to steer the ship back, and it won't go. And could not bear into the wind. We let her drive. In other words, they just took the hand off and said, you know what? Wherever this thing is going to end up,
That's where we'll be.
it's going to end up. We're either going to die or we're not. We're cranking on the wheel as hard as we can, and the rudder ain't doing it. The wind's just taking us. Let her drive. And running under a certain island, which is called Clauda, we had much work to come by the boat, which, when they had taken up, they used helps, undergirding the ship and fearing lest they should fall into quicksands, strake the sail, and so were driven. And you're like, what in the world does all that mean? Okay, so basically what's happening here is the ship is getting beat up so bad, they're taking ropes and cables and tying the thing together. Right? Because the wood is starting to rip apart. Now these were not welded or riveted steel hulls, right? They would take a certain amount of beating and they would bust. And this thing was starting to come apart. So when he says undergirdings, it means that they were actually wrapping ropes around it, trying to pull the hull back together so that it didn't bust, let all the water in and kill everybody. That's what's going on right there. And striking the sails means they just pulled all the sails down. They're like, you know what? The sails are going to tear if we leave them up. Because that's a big problem too. Sails can only stand so much. Right? When the wind is relatively even and relatively polite, it pushes the ship along at a nice speed. But when you're in the middle of a cyclone and everything's going insane, it'll tear them right off. Right? They're just made of cloth. They have a ripping point, you know, just like anybody's clothing. You know, if you grab my shirt hard enough, it's going to tear, so will the sail. They pulled them all down and said, you know what? This is it, and this is it, boys. This is it. The ship really is going to go anywhere that it wants. We can't steer with the rudder. The sails have no effect. We're just going to pull everything down, and we're just going to go. There it is. And it got worse, and we being exceedingly tossed with a tempest, it's getting real rough now. The next day they lightened the ship. They were throwing out the cargo. Whatever it was they were carrying, they're like, yeah, we need to get rid of this. The third day we cast out with our own hands the tacking. Now they're throwing away the sails and all of the equipment that holds the sails in place. Anybody ever seen a sailing ship up close? They have like all these big pulley blocks and stuff, right? Back in the day, they used to be made out of wood, and then they started making them out of metal, but they've got all of these fancy fittings and stuff for tightening and pulling. They're throwing all of that overboard now, too. Now, many of you know, that stuff wouldn't be cheap, right? So they are in a desperate spot here now. This is bad. They are at the point where going, yeah, we're probably going to die here. They're doing everything they can think of. Now they're throwing important pieces of the ship overboard. And the third day we cast out the tackling of the ship. And when neither sun nor stars in many days appeared, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope we should be saved was then taken away. This storm was so bad they didn't see daytime. They didn't see nighttime. They had no stars to navigate with, because they didn't have GPS. They didn't have electronic gyroscopic positioning systems. We could tell now a ship to where it is to a couple of feet location, because we think we're so smart. We've invented all these cool things. They couldn't see the sky at all, so they had no idea where they were for days. And they said, we've given up all hope. We're going to die. They're just waiting for when. And after a long abstinence, Paul stood forth in the midst of them. So he just said, I'm just going to go below deck and wait. And sooner or later, they're going to come ask me for advice, because all of their ideas now have run out. Even though they laughed at me and said, you're not a sailor, stupid, get out of here. Even though I warned them it was going to be trouble, they didn't care. So after this long period, Paul stood forth in the midst of them, here we go again, and said, sirs, you should have hearkened unto me, and not loosed from Crete, and to have gained this harm and loss. Well, thank you, Captain Obvious. Yeah, we are in the poo-poo now, and yeah, you did tell us not to go. And thank you for pointing out that you did tell us not to go. Who of you have friends that do that? That may not give the world's best advice and then wait till you're in the middle of it and say, I told you shouldn't have done that. No, you didn't. Well, yeah, sort of I did. Oh, great. Thanks. You got any more advice? Anybody know people like that? Right? They're not going to bring you any good news. They're not going to cheer you up or even attempt to cheer you up. They're just going to say, see, stupid, I told you. They're always happy to point out your flaw. But he didn't do this. Well, sort of he did. Okay, yeah. He kind of did. First he beat him up, right? He said, you should have hearkened to me. But, here's the big but, capital B-U-T, semicolon. Now I exhort you to be of good cheer. There shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but we're going to lose the ship. There stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve, saying, fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar, and lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with thee. How many times did Paul get arrested? We're not even sure how many times Paul got arrested. It was a lot. We do know he was in Rome 3 times. Twice he went before Caesar, or Caesar's representative, and charges were dismissed. We know the 3rd time he was killed. He was executed. But it didn't say he was going to die on a ship by drowning, right? He said, by God's hand, whom I am, I shall be saved. But he didn't say, the rest of you, sorry, you're all out of luck. You're all going to die, but I'm going to be cool. He said, no, this angel gave me the message that even though y'all didn't listen to me, in this particular case, God's going to be merciful and he's going to keep all of you. Didn't he say that? He said, all them that sail. Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God that it shall be even as it was told me. All right, so don't forget the storm hasn't stopped yet. So they're probably yelling at each other, trying to be heard. Because they all ever been inside of a cyclone or something like that? A typhoon? It's not quiet, is it? There's things flying around. The wind is making a super loud howling noise, so they're probably actually yelling to be heard. Back and forth, he says, be of good cheer. And they're like, what, are you crazy? Do you see what is going on right here, right now? Howbeit we must be cast upon a certain island. And when the 14th night was come, as we were driven up and down in Adria about midnight, the shipmen deemed that they drew near to some country, and sounded and found it 20 fathoms, and they went a little further and found it now 15 fathoms. If I remember right, I think a fathom is 7? It's either 7 or 8 feet, I think. So the water's still deep enough the ship's not endangered yet. But then he says, then fearing lest we should have fallen upon rocks, they cast 4 anchors and hoped for a day. And as the shipmen were about to flee out of the ship, when they let down the boat into the sea, the lifeboat they were carrying, the smaller boat, under color as though they would have cast anchors out of the foreship, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, except these abide in the ship, you will not be saved. Do not get into that lifeboat. The ship that we're on is bigger. It may be pretty beat up, and it's got wire and duct tape holding it together, but if you get out, you will die. And the soldiers cut off the ropes of the boat and let her fall off. They heeded him, didn't they? He said, okay, you know what? This guy's been right once. He told us not to leave, so maybe he's not crazy. Maybe he really did see an angel. Maybe we better listen. They cut the ropes off and let the other boat go. And nobody was in it. And while the day was coming on, Paul besought them all to take meat, saying, this day is the 14th day ye have tarried and continued fasting, having taken nothing. So they were terrified. They hadn't eaten in 2 weeks. Because A, they were scared, and B, like I said, the thing was probably hopping around so much that anybody that got seasick was probably chumming over the side, right? Wherefore I pray you to take some meat, for this is for your health. You got to be hungry by now. For there shall not an hair fall from the head of any of you. He's saying, I got this. Well, God's got this, not Paul himself, of course. And when they had thus spoken, he took bread and gave thanks to God in presence of them all, and when he had broken it, he began to eat. They were all of good cheer, and they also took some meat. And we all in the ship, 216. So that's 276 people. So that was a pretty good sized boat. That was a ship. That was no little toy. You can fit 276 people on there comfortably. And cargo. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and cast out the wheat into the sea. Now they're dumping the rest of the cargo. And when it was day, they knew not the land, but they discovered a certain creek with a shore, into the which they were minded, if it were possible, to thrust in the ship. Now they're trying to find a place to land. And when they'd taken up the anchors, they committed themselves to the sea and loosed the rudder bands and hoisted up the mainsail of the wind and made toward shore. So here they're actually listening to him, right? Even though the XO and the captain said, y'all are nuts, shut up, stop telling me how to do my job. Now all of a sudden they put all that aside and they're actually going with everything he's telling them to do, aren't they? Now they're putting the sails back up again. It's like, oh, but you told me to take the sails down. Well, now we need them. So whatever the tackling that they hadn't thrown overboard yet, they pulled up the anchors, raised the sail, and went forward, and made toward shore. And falling into a place where 2 seas met, they ran the ship aground, and the fore part stuck fast and remained unmovable, and the hinder part was broken with the violence of the waves. So they hit into dirt, or a piece of rock, whatever it was, hard enough that the front end of the ship couldn't pull back out again. So now they're stuck to land. And still the storm is so violent that it busts the back end of the ship completely off it. That's what it says, right? It smashed it with the violence, broken with the violence of the waves. And the soldiers' counsel was to kill all the prisoners, lest any of them should swim away. Yeah, good luck with that, in that kind of ocean condition, and escape. The centurion, willing to save Paul, kept them from their purpose, and commanded they which could swim should cast themselves first into the sea and get to land, and the rest some on boards and some on broken pieces of the ship. And so it came to pass, they all escaped to land. So, what can you pull out of that? If you're in a storm, don't take the supposed expert's advice. Dr. Phil doesn't know. Neither does Oprah. Or whoever the other supposed help you, self-help, help me, whatever. The experts didn't do a good job here, did they? They sailed out and the ship got smashed. If you take their advice and you're in the storm, your ship's probably going to get smashed too. So you might get advice that sounds insane. Don't leave. And if you do, then you might get more advice that sounds insane. Drive the ship into the land and everybody's going to be fine. Like, did you look around? We're in the middle of a typhoon. Yeah, people are going to die. No, they're not. And then you're going to go on your own understanding and say, I'm getting in the lifeboat. I'm getting out of here. He said, that's a stupid idea. Anybody who gets in that lifeboat shall die. But they cut the ropes and left the lifeboat go. And everyone got off the ship. See where I'm going?
Yeah.
Lean not to your own understanding, what?
All that way.
All thy ways acknowledge him.
Yeah.
And he shall direct thy path. If they had listened to the direction of the path, they all would have been fine and the ship would not have been destroyed. They all lived, but they still suffered a loss, didn't they? The cargo went in the ocean. Half of the sails and all the parts that were on it went in the ocean. And half of the ship's end, the rear half, got busted right off. So we don't really know whether there were any parts left that were useful at all or whether it was a complete write-off. But yeah, they all lived. So you might get out of your storm, but you might not be in very good shape when you do. So you're like, huh. Well, there are consequences. You listen to God's warning and his direction, his directives, most of the time you'll get out without a scratch. Not always. Sometimes he will beat you up to teach you a lesson, but they would have escaped without a scratch. But yet it wasn't the end. At that point, he said, okay, yeah, you tackheads didn't listen to me. Had to be, what do you call them, stiff-necked and uncircumcised, but I'm going to let you suffer some loss, but I'm going to get you out of this mess. That's what we need to take away from this lesson.
Baptism.
Yes, baptism.
Close out.
You can kill the broadcast.